Hello everyone, welcome to a new project in Planet Coaster 2 that I'm starting today. This is called Utopia World, for lack of a better name really. What I'm looking to do in this series is create a somewhat realistic park to the best of my abilities. We're not going super detailed with realism, but just to the extent that it's somewhat believable and everything could actually be in a real park in real life. So obviously starting off today with the entrance building, and I'm using one of the people's statues there as the sort of new version of the archer, which is to sort of dictate the scale that this needs to be in. And although I use this guide, because of the scale of Planet Coaster 2 and for that matter Planet Coaster 1, the entrance building is still quite small. When you compare it to other buildings that are in game, the facilities and stuff, so that might be an issue going forward, but it's been built now and it certainly looks good and it looks the right scale, even slightly big to be honest in comparison to the guide we've got there. But building everything custom obviously so that it's the right size, not using any sort of pre-made walls or anything. Starting off then with some pillars made of brick pieces, and it's all very generic. I wanted a very generic entrance building. The inspiration that I took for this one was from a couple of US parks actually, so Worlds of Fun was one of them, and I can't remember what the others were, but I just sort of googled some amusement park entrances, because we're going for an amusement park with sort of some themed areas, but nothing too crazy heavily detailed or anything like that. Just as a first off project, I didn't want to do anything too crazy. This is my first full attempt at a full park in the game, and I just wanted to see what really can be done with the game in the current state that it's in. So yeah, obviously there is now an easier way to do the dome or the rounding technique, which I haven't figured out yet, but apparently you can clip things to the moving platform, the rotational one, and it will just do it on both sides or something like that. But the old-fashioned way works well enough for me, and I can do it fairly quickly because I've been doing it for a good few years now. So that's absolutely fine, just doing it the normal way for me. And yeah, all in all, this entrance building didn't take an incredibly long time to put together, because it's fairly straightforward really. Just putting a few trims around the top of the pillars, and we've got obviously the nice archway to signify this is the entrance. That's where the sign for the park ends up going as well. Yeah, just a lot of playing about with different pieces, seeing what works, what doesn't, what can be scaled to the right size as well. Because it's great that we've got the scaling, but some things just still won't quite go to the size that you need them. So it's a lot of playing about, a lot of trial and error to try and get everything to work out exactly how I wanted it. But you can see the basic idea that we've got here, using some trims and some I don't know what you'd call those pieces really, but anyway, we're moving on to the dome or the spire to go on the top of the pillars, and I was really happy with how this worked out. I tried something similar in my last build, which worked out quite well, so I thought I would try that again. And you can use some of the pottery pieces here as well as detail, decorative. I never know what to call these spikes that come out the top of the spire. If anyone knows, let me know. But in the end, I just ended up with a sword piece and rotated it a bit, and yeah, all came together pretty easily and looks pretty good, I think. So that is our gate, and then I just wanted to complete it by tying everything in together, so using the exact same pieces and then sinking them into the pillars. All very straightforward. And for the roof, it's just I can't remember what piece that is, to be honest, but I think it might be a mythology decor piece, or maybe even a resort decor piece. But it's just a pretty ordinary piece that works quite well for what I'm trying to do. So I've sort of been doing this a little bit quieter than previously on the channel. The initial hype of the game coming out has sort of run its course now. Obviously we're into the first DLC, we've already got to that sort of stage. I haven't actually got the DLC yet because I don't need any more rides. I've barely played around with the ones we've got yet, so it seems like a little bit of a waste of money to me to buy that. I don't really want it. If it was a scenery pack, I would definitely be buying it, because I've already played about with quite a lot of the pieces in the game. I'm ready for some new ones. Obviously there's still a lot that I haven't discovered yet in the game, but I'm hoping that doing this park build will give me the opportunity to try out quite a lot of the different rides and coasters in the game. And so here's to hoping that going forward I know we're getting free updates, and the developers have sort of somewhat apologised for the release of the DLC, which didn't go down too well. So hopefully with the free updates and stuff, we'll get some new scenery pieces and some fixes to some of the things that are still an issue ongoing with the game. But nevertheless, what I was initially going to say then, before I went off topic, was it's been quite quiet for videos the last couple of weeks. Obviously we've had Christmas, and throughout the Christmas break, when I've had a spare couple of hours here and there, I've come in and worked on this build. And I think hopefully we should be able to sort of move forward with it and really start getting stuck into this series as we go into the new year. And I hope you all had a fantastic Christmas, and wishing you all a happy new year when that comes around in a few days. My Christmas was pretty good. I'm all Christmased out now, when you just eat and drink too much and watch rubbish telly, and you think I could be doing something a little bit more productive than that. So video games it was. That's the entrance building itself then complete. We're now doing what you see in quite a lot of parks, which is having separate buildings off to the sides of the entrance building. This one in particular is a ticket booth on one side, and it will be a guest services on the other side once you're inside the park. Although that's how it is at the moment. I am thinking though that I'll probably change this into just a ticket building and have both the shops facing on the outside, and then we'll do a separate guest services. Obviously this doesn't function as a ticket booth, we don't have anything like that in the game, which is fine. It's just for show and for realism, but it would actually make more sense for this to just be tickets, and for us to have a slightly more fancy guest services building in the actual park itself, because we're going to need stuff like lockers maybe, and push chairs and stuff like that, and mobility scooters and stuff that you can rent. So we need a building where guests can go and sort all that out, and I suppose buy their fast passes and stuff like that as well. That would all be done in a building like that. Whereas this is a very, very basic ticket booth. But I think it works out quite well next to the entrance building, and it was fairly straightforward to make as well. Now that I've decided on sort of the pieces that we're using, this very plain brick texture and some very plain pillars and stuff, it's now easier to just put everything together and use the same pieces for various different buildings, but just in a slightly different way to keep things more interesting. One thing I'm not particularly happy with is the lighting that we've got on the entrance building so far. You won't see anything at night yet. We just don't have much of a selection of lamps really. I'm not entirely happy with the selection of wall lamps that we've got. So in future, if we do get something that's a little bit more generic, I will be replacing the ones we've got there, because I think they're a bit too modern for the style of building. But I needed to put some sort of lighting in, so that's just what I went with. Playing about with the pathing then to make basically just stop guests walking through stuff, and that actually does work out quite well. I was quite pleased with that. I tried to do a planter thing there, but it didn't work, so in the end I just put a planter down, and guests will clip through this, but I don't care. I couldn't be bothered to mess around trying to get a perfect circle in there or anything. You can see as well we've got another building now just behind these trees, and this is going to be a staff building of some sort. I don't know exactly what yet. We'll have to get a bit creative and think what that would be, but it's, I'd say, fairly plausible to have something like this near the entrance of the park itself. But I do end up changing out the brick colour because I thought it was just a little bit too repetitive, and for some reason I had an idea pop into my head that some lighter coloured wood would work better for this, so it's almost sort of like a mobile sort of building. That makes sense. Kind of difficult to explain. I mean, it's not. It's, you know, it's a permanent fixture, but yeah, I just thought a different texture would work better. Also, after doing these windows, I wasn't happy with them at all, so we end up changing them out and putting something much neater in later on in the build. At this point, I'm just trying to cover up all the little bits with the brick texture, and yeah, I think these windows look quite awful, to be honest. So I'm very glad that I changed them in the end. But everything else about the building stays, just the walls and windows, and we get change. You can see now this is the texture we're going for, so it's more of a wood texture, and I think it works out a lot better for this building. I also sunk it in a little bit more to the ground, so that it doesn't stand taller than the entrance itself. We need it to be to scale, or to the scale that we've got here, which is probably the wrong scale for the game anyway. As I mentioned before, that's another issue that we're going to probably have to face once moving into the park, and build things a little bit taller so that the shops and the facilities and things like that fit in nicely. You'll see what I mean when I put a toilet block in a bit. Here is a new window then, much more straightforward, much more basic, and much more clean looking. I'm happy with this. Obviously our new glass pieces are going in. Hooray for glass pieces. First time I've needed them actually, so that worked out perfectly timing wise. And yeah, it's just a case really then of sinking the walls around them and making sure everything's neat and there's no clipping. Changing the time there, you can see the colour now, how it actually looks in broad daylight, and it's much better. Easier to work with as well. Sometimes I forget that the time is sort of on rotation in this game. One improvement that I'm looking forward to using more is the weather, and being able to set the weather ourselves, so if we don't want it to rain we don't have to have it raining. But I do want to play about with the rain feature a bit more in the game, because I think it's a cool thing that we didn't have in Planet Coaster 1. I just don't like the way the sun still shines when it's raining. Hopefully that's something they fix at some point. Moving on then to pathing, and I spent absolutely ages on this. I just couldn't decide what I wanted to do with the pathing for this plaza as you come into the park. So I ended up with this, I believe that's a hexagon shape or something like that. Just using one of the shape paths works perfectly, so we've got a different ground texture, just so it's not all bland and boring and all the same colour everywhere. But I do go back and change the rest of the path around it because I'm not happy with the shape. That's a bit later in the video. For now though, we're just doing some planters around the entrance to make everything look a bit more pretty. and nice. It's again, we're quite limited for flower beds and flowers in the game, but you can recolour them, so I think what we've got at the moment is sufficient, and for a very generic build like this as well, the ones we've got are absolutely fine. So the next thing that I do is a car park. So I pulled out all the path that I had at this point before, because I basically didn't have enough room for the car park. You haven't seen it on screen, but I moved everything backwards. I basically selected all of the buildings and pathwork and just dragged it a bit further back so we've got room for car parks. And I'm never very good at this sort of exterior of the park stuff. So what I've kind of done is just put placeholder car parks in and pathwork so the guests can access the park, but that's all subject to change at some point later on in the build. Doing some more planters now for the central plaza because I thought it was a bit bland, and I'm not overly keen on the sort of black line that goes around it. It's obviously set in game, you can't change that, but I think it's fine seeing some of it, but with the planters around to make it look a bit more interesting. Now our sign goes in, Utopia World. I was thinking for ages what am I going to call this park. I couldn't come up with anything brilliant. I wanted something park, but then I decided I also wanted amusement park underneath the name, so yeah, went with Utopia World, and I think it's fine, nothing crazy, just an average name. The sign as well, very average, but the bigger letters which I wanted wouldn't scale down small enough, so we kept with the smaller text. And then the next thing I do is some lampposts. Just added a basic shape to the top of them for a little bit more detail, and then I decided it was time to sort out this path, this plaza, and I thought having a perfect circular shape is going to work out a lot better, and I'm much happier with how this turned out in the end. As you can see, I had several attempts at trying to get it right, and then merging all the paths together. I am now getting a bit better at doing pathing just because of the amount that I've done in this build. It takes quite a lot to learn the pathing in this game. It's not straightforward. I don't think it's very particularly intuitive, but if you do spend enough time learning it, you can get some fairly good results. And you can see the plaza looks so much better now than how we had it before, so I'm glad I went back and changed that. Doing some pedestrian crossings then to separate the car park and the path entrance. Nothing like that, like I say, is finalised yet. It's just really a placeholder until we go and work on all that stuff. I didn't want to do any car park stuff in this episode, just focusing on this entrance plaza. So the next thing that I work on is a security area, or security gates. Not going heavily detailed with this or anything. I'm not building stuff for them to check your bags on or anything like that, but that's what this would sort of be for. This is what is implied here, that this is an area where the security will search your bags before you go into a park, which pretty much every theme park I can think of nowadays tends to have this for safety reasons. Just copying the window from the staff building that we made earlier and rotating it around, and then everything else is just copied really from the ticket booth, but just done slightly differently again, just to make sure we're cohesive with how everything looks, using the same colours and textures, but getting that bit of variation as well. I do sink the fence into the roof here as well, so it's just a little bit more varied, and we've got the 3 spire bits on top as well. That's pretty much it for the security building. Might go back and add a bit more detail to that at some point, but it's fine for now. Next thing I wanted to do was some fencing. They don't have my favourite fence that we had in Planet Coaster 1, which is just a plain wooden wall, so I used the Viking wooden wall, which is quite spiky, So turn it upside down and it works for just a plain fence, and I think we'll stick with this. I think it's good enough, and I think it's generic enough to be believable for this sort of park. And I've just left a little gap there to put a tree in, and again I think that's all we're going to do with that, because it looks believable enough. It looks it's quite a nice composition. Doing a sign in for the tickets. I do jump around a little bit in this build, so just trying to keep up with everything. And at this point I still decided I wasn't happy with the windows on this building, and I wanted to scale them down, make them a bit smaller. So I went in and did that. They just looked a little bit too big in comparison to the entrance building and the guests and stuff around the area. So yeah, it was actually fairly straightforward to resize them. It's just a case of scaling them down and moving all the walls around them to match. The last thing then really that I work on here is the toilet building. The majority of parks do have toilets just before you enter, which obviously is useful for on your way in and on your way out. So it's quite important to have this. And I ripped this off a reference image for a ticket booth, or a ticket office or something, at one of the Disney parks. I'm not sure which one. It just come up when I very quickly googled ticket booths on Google for a bit of inspiration for that, which I never used, but I thought this gabled part, is it, like overhanging bit at the front, would work perfectly for a toilet or a restroom building. So that's what we go with, a very small one, just one ladies, one gents, and using some support pieces actually for the detailing on the front here, for the trims and stuff. Initially I was trying to use a wooden plank, but I didn't like the texture on it, and I realised that the support pieces, when they're scaled down, can work out perfectly for that. So that's what we go with. And then just finishing off slightly different coloured roof. I didn't want it to stand out too much, but you can see the main problem here is that the restrooms are sunken into the ground, so they're like 1 point of a grid space down to the actual building itself. Then we're just going to have to cover that up for foliage, and that really was because it just looked too tall and out of place compared to the entrance building and everything else if we had them at ground level. And that's really when I realised that this might be an issue with the scale that I've gone for in this build. So it really is aesthetics over over game practicality, because it's, we can't sink all the buildings into the ground like that in the park. So I'm going to have to find a way of making everything at least 1.0 sort of grid height, all my buildings, so that we can fit the facilities and shops in them that we need to, but without everything looking ridiculously tall in comparison to the entrance. So it's going to be tricky, but we'll work something out. Anyway, that's the build. Enjoy the cinematics at the end. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.